Rochester Police, like so many other agencies nation and statewide, are facing a great deal of changes and challenges. After major police reform across the country last year, Police Chief Jim Franklin had been working closely with Mayor Kim Norton and has continued. They've been in many discussions on policing in a city that is rapidly growing and the role law enforcement plays. They've expanded the response for mental health calls by increasing the number of social workers and EMS professionals that go out on certain 911 calls. They're also working on changing the culture inside the police department.
This is an opportunity for change, and we don't want to miss that opportunity. And it's not to denigrate or put down any of the great work that our police department has already done, but across the country, these kinds of reforms are happening, and we have been on the lead, and we want to continue to lead in this area.
Rochester Police Chief Jim Franklin joins me to talk more specifics about what this re-envisioning means. You've been working on this for months. Is this coming out of the wake of what happened last May with George Floyd, or was this something that you were working on even before all of the changes started happening in the last year?
Yeah, so we were working on, propelling this agency forward through 21st century policing concepts and the 21st century policing report pillars. We were certainly driving the agency that way before the death of George Floyd. This re-envisioning blueprint here is really the affirmation for this community, showcasing what we're committed to doing, all the actions that we're committed to doing, broken down underneath those 6 identified pillars.
Explain those pillars. I know that we've talked about them in the past, but for people who are not familiar with them, I know a lot of it has to do with having your officers be much more community-centered.
Yes, we're certainly an agency that places a high premium on community engagement, which would be pillar 4 of this document, community policing, crime reduction. If you really think about law enforcement, the only time you have contact with law enforcement is usually in a time of crisis or a time of enforcement capacity. Both of those are negative. And so a key tenet of 21st century policing is having engagement or time with the community, engage in non-crisis, non-enforcement to build those relationships, build those partnerships. I very much believe in relational policing, in investing in the community.
I need to reference something here that I was sent talking about now bear with me, okay? This is their words, the plummeting quality of life in Rochester as it relates to crime. So there's some numbers and crime statistics and shootings, most specifically, has been brought up. It was posted on social media, and I did want to talk to you a little bit about this because perception by one person doesn't mean another person sees it that way. Talk to me and really reference the fact that where crime is at in Rochester, comparatively speaking, in the last 5-10 years as you know it.
Yeah, so although we responded to about 8,000 less calls for service in 2020 as compared to 2019, we did see a significant uptick in violent calls for service. And so, yes, there has been an uptick. Overall, I will say that the city of Rochester has a very low crime rate if in comparative speaking to kind of the national average. But 2020 was a tough year. It was a tough year. We've also had a significant uptick, a 6-year increase in crisis calls for service, those people in mental crisis. And so those are the types of problems that we need to come together as a community to collectively solve, that law enforcement's not going to solve all by themselves. And that's why I'm such a big proponent of the co-responder model to mental health crisis calls for service, police officers working hand in hand with embedded social workers.
We have talked about this and focused on this in recent months because there have been changes as far as bringing social workers with you and having different units or teams, as they are, respond to different crisis calls. Can you speak to that a little bit more and give people more of an idea of what that means when I call 911 and maybe my teenager is flipping out, but it's not necessarily where there's a danger to the community, but there might be a danger in my house?
Yeah, so we've recently increased the number of social workers. We had one, now we have four. I need to thank the county for their commitment to increasing that program. So we now have 4 active social workers working alongside both the Rochester Police Department and the Olmsted County Sheriff's Department, readily available to deploy to calls for service, those people in crisis, alongside of either an RPD officer or a deputy to help de-escalate, mitigate the situation. And it's an incredible partnership. I'm also excited for when the crisis center comes online here shortly. And if we can link up what we're doing with the social workers, with the crisis center, I think that's only going to strengthen us as a community.
Jim, I'm going to take a quick 2-minute break if I can. And when we come on the other side of this, you've been in Rochester leading the police department for 2 years. You get to know people, and all of a sudden your city council has changed. So if you can give me 2 minutes, we'll come back and talk about that. I'm continuing my conversation now with Rochester Police Chief Jim Franklin, talking about his plans to re-envision the police department and presenting to city council members just this afternoon about this. How different is it, Chief Franklin, when you were just getting to know the council members who you have to really speak to a lot, and now the faces have changed? It changes the dynamic, doesn't it?
Well, that was part of what today was about, was just presenting kind of a State of the Union address to the new council members, as we have 4 new ones. Just affirming, outlining what we have been working on, what we have been working towards, what we're going to work on, kind of what we're committed to doing, both short term and long term. That's the transparency piece of just getting in front of the elected officials and thereby the community and saying, this is your police department and this is what we're working on, what we're doing. And then also listening and saying, what else are you concerned about, as they are that reflective voice of the community.
And what is it that they're hearing? Because as they were running for office, I spoke to a number of them and we had debates, and they talked about what their communities or their wards that they represent, the concerns were in their wards. And so what were you hearing today as you listened to them?
Well, I believe what I heard was that there is a tremendous amount of support in this community for the Rochester Police Department, and I think that's fantastic. And we are an agency that's dedicated to continuous improvement. We're not going to sit back, and we're not going to kind of rest on that reputation. We're going to continue to earn that every day as we move forward. We're going to continue to invest in this community. We're going to continue to engage this community at the highest possible level, continuing to earn back the trust that was lost, quite frankly, earlier in 2020, and continue to build those relationships and really propel the agency forward towards this relational policing model.
Before you went into today's meeting, were you wondering the response that you would get? Because as we continue to watch larger metropolitan police agencies get less funding, lose their staff members, you already are facing an uphill battle with recruiting. Were you worried at all about what you were going to hear?
Well, that's the challenge of being a chief today, and every chief across the board has that challenge of how do we continue to build back that public trust? How do we deal with the policing reform issues that are potentially coming down the pipe? And then, how do we lead the organization? So I think that's just the challenge of this job. And so, no, I guess I wasn't surprised. It's just kind of always at the forefront of my mind. and the leadership challenge of this profession.
It must have been a relief, though, knowing that you've got 4 new council members and you didn't necessarily hear, we want you to do more with less staff, less budget, less equipment, and that doesn't sound like that happened.
Yeah, I certainly didn't get the, defund the police. Again, I think there's a lot of support for this organization moving forward. And again, our commitment to this community is that we are always going to strive to get better. We're always going to strive to perform. Yes, we're going to make mistakes. That's going to happen, but that we're going to own them. We're going to learn from them and hopefully come out stronger.
Chief, can you speak to your budget at all and what kind of money you are hoping to have in the next fiscal cycle and things you want to add?
Yeah, that's a tougher question, Betsy. Quite frankly, I'm kind of taking a tempered approach in sitting back and saying, what are the impacts of COVID-19 on this community? What does that look like? Because that might, quite frankly, change budgeting moving forward. So I'm going to take kind of a wait and see approach to that, and we'll kind of let the economy level out.
That is a nice PC answer at this point, because you didn't expect me to ask about the budget and where you want to spend some money. I was just curious, as we're talking, that then becomes an issue down the road. But it is good. At this point, so many businesses are hurting, and we don't know where the city's budget is going to be moving forward. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate your time, Chief. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.